And welcome everyone to Committee of the Whole this evening, December 6th, and welcome members of council and staff that are here. All members of council are present, except for Councillor Wendy McLeod-Haggett. Do you know if she's joining on Zoom?
She has not joined yet.
Okay, thank you. And our staff are here. We'll welcome everyone in the gallery that's participating and those that are home watching us on Zoom. And we'll ask that everyone make sure their cell phones are off or on mute, please. And I'll turn to Ms. Masulla-Carlson for item number 2.
That South Huron Committee of the Whole approves the agenda as presented.
And a mover, please. Moved by Deputy Mayor, seconded by Councillor Neeb. Any discussion? Call the question. All in favor? And that carries with 6. Thank you. Disclosure of pecuniary interest and the general nature thereof from members of council. And not seeing any. Thank you. We'll go to item number 4 and we'll turn the agenda over to staff. Thank you.
The staff presentation this evening was prepared for committee information as a result of notice of motion 428/2023 that was passed by council at their November 20th, 2023 meeting. The first 2 slides of the presentation contain the preamble of the notice of motion, and the following slides, for them, staff have broken out the questions and provided written answers. The full notice of motion, staff will provide responses to the questions of the committee. The full notice of motion is attached to the agenda after the PowerPoint presentation. I will read out the questions for the committee and the responses are noted on the slides. Andrew Grinda from Watson Associates is also here in attendance and available to answer questions along with staff. As an explanation and information to the members of the public, the Committee of the Whole can make recommendations to council. However, council is the final decision maker.
Thank you.
We'll go to the first slide, Scott. So this is the notice of motion. I believe if council or the committee wants me to read it, I can. Otherwise, we'll move over to question number 1.
I think we'll go on question number 1, please. Thank you.
So notice of motion question number 1. The developer advised in correspondence through his agent that he was willing to upfront 100% of the cost of the upsizing of the pipe. Why is this option not being presented, as this would demonstrate and fulfill the council's stated intention that development pays for development? And the staff response is noted in yellow.
Thank you. Questions from members of council for staff? Councillor Vaughn.
I know Rebecca just went through process here. So are we going to be asking questions as we go through the presentation as opposed to at the end where there's a slide for questions?
That was my thinking, that's what would work the best.
Okay.
Okay.
So then I do have a question, if I may.
Yes, you may. Go ahead.
Okay. Okay, in the staff response in the last paragraph, it says that a cost recovery bylaw to reimburse the developer directly for the oversizing was considered and declined. And so my question is, why was it declined? Was it declined by Mosh or was it declined by the developer Tridon?
Okay, thank you for the question. Turn to staff for a response.
Yes, through you, Mayor Finch. This cost recovery reimbursement directly to the developer was discussed, and declining was from both the developer and the municipal staff. The developer did not wish to carry those costs, so he declined.
Okay, thank you. Follow-up question, Councillor Vaughn?
Yeah, I'm just wondering why the developer declined, if you could share that with us, if he didn't see a payback coming for some time or if there was some other reason, because it was in a letter from them that they first introduced it. So
Mr. Carverson.
Through you, Mayor Finch, the first point on the our response is that the request was made by Baker Planning Group. But it was qualified that the upfront payment was based on an acceptable repayment plan. So that could not be achieved by the developer paying 100% of the cost and carrying those costs. And the developer has made it very clear to me that he is not prepared to pay 100% of the cost of an oversized pipe.
Thank you. Councillor Wilk, did you have a question?
Yeah, just on that that very first paragraph that you referenced there, Don, the mutually conditional on reaching a mutually acceptable agreement, and I just wondered what happened in that process as far as the negotiations that took place, trying to come up with an agreement.
Mr. Giverson?
Through you, Mayor Finch. Yes, the expectations from the developer was first that the request was for deferred DC charges, which was reviewed by the staff, and the number of units that are in this proposed development will not repay the DC charges. And there was a bit of a misunderstanding. The developer's expectation was that the entire DC charges amount, which is just a little over $5,000 a lot, could be repaid, but that is not correct. It's only the sewer portion, which is roughly about $800. So with the number of lots proposed and the $800 approximate amount of the DC charges that could be paid, like deferred in lieu of the developer paying the full amount, doesn't equal, like you can't get enough out of the deferred DC charges. So that was realized that scheme does not, or that proposal does not work. And that is like one of the options that was discussed. The discussion is then moved on to if the municipality would fund the oversizing costs. And that was an acceptable repayment for the developer.
Thank you for your fulsome answer, Mr. Giverson. Any other questions from members of council? Okay, not seeing any. Ms. Masula Carlson, next, please.
Following page. Notice of motion question number 2. How successful have the cost recovery bylaws been in the past where deferred payments have occurred?
Thank you. Any questions? Okay. Not seeing any. Oh, Councillor Vaughn, you have something? Go ahead.
Only a comment. In terms of, I see that there's a lot of benefits listed here, and some of them I tend to agree with in terms of reduced initial costs to benefiting property owners. But others, like recovered oversizing costs within the timeframes expected, I'm not sure that I would agree with that as a particular benefit, or if that has actually occurred. I just wondered if someone might be able to explain why that's a benefit and how it is we think we met the timelines.
Okay, thank you. Staff, are they able to respond to that? Mr. Giverson?
Through you, Mayor Finch. This is very clear that the recovering the oversizing cost within the life of the debenture or within the expected life expectancy of the infrastructure is a win for the municipality. So that's why that comment is there as a measured success, because the expected timeline, this infrastructure has a very long life. So that is why that comment is there, that is a measurable success of recovering those costs within the expected timelines, which is the life of the infrastructure.
Thank you for your fulsome answer, Mr. Giverson. Any other questions? Councillor Neeb.
Thank you, Mayor Finch. Just in terms of cost, in in a lot of ways, we're putting this infrastructure in to allow for growth. If we were to wait to put in this infrastructure, what would the cost be?
Mr. Giberson?
Yes, through you, Mayor Finch. The construction cost index is advancing a far greater rate than the cost of living or the consumer price index. And it has substantially increased through the pandemic. But to give you a milestone of how the construction related cost increase, the Grand Bend Trunk Sewer Phase 1, when it was initially proposed to proceed in 2015, had an engineer's estimate of $1 million. When it did proceed, almost 10 years later, the cost was in the $2 million range. So that gives you an idea of the order of magnitude of how these infrastructure costs increase. They're not small, but then they increase substantially over the years.
Thank you for your response. Any other questions? Okay, not seeing any. Okay, move on to the next one, please.
Question number 3. What are the actual dollars that have been recovered from future developments and future connections?
Any questions? Councillor Oak. Microphone, please.
Yep, thanks, Mayor. Got too many things going on here to come up with it. So my math shows that we've collected around $444,000 in the previous arrangements that we've had for deferred projects, and on projects that I guess what was the, and one is 53%, one is 10%. So we're maybe 25% collected on those projects in total, give or take. Whoever would like to answer that.
Ms. Warwick. Ms. Warwick, would you be able to answer that?
Through you, Mayor Finch, are you talking 25% of those two projects that have the?
Microphone.
Ted,
Ted, microphone, please.
sorry, those are the only two that that we've got money back from based on the questions or the answers that we've got, it looks like. So yeah, just wondering on the total of those deferred projects, I think they're around $2 million, give or take.
Do you, Mayor Finch? By my calculations per the bylaws, the deferred total payments related to these 4 cost recovery bylaws are about $3,465,000. And we have recovered approximately $444,000 to bring about 12.8% repaid.
Yeah, okay, that I wondered about that one number that I had. So yeah, so I had 3,465,000. So okay. So yeah, so just, and that's over quite a few years. Okay, so we're at about 12% so far. Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Neeb, go ahead, please.
Thank you, Mayor Finch. What is the lifespan on those specific assets that are in the ground remaining?
Mr. Giberson.
Through you, Mayor Finch, all of the linear infrastructure that's on here has a 100-year lifespan. The sewage plant does have components that are 15 to 20, but the balance of the work is in the 75-year range. The sewage pumping station has some components, the electrical, mechanical instrumentation, and the PLCs have a lifespan of 15 to 20. Beyond that, the rest of the station has a 75-year lifespan.
Thank you. Any other questions? Councillor Vaughn.
Yeah, Julia, the $3,465,000 figure, I don't know that I have that one. Where's that from? Is that from this total of the memoranda or the email that Rebecca sent out? Does that add up to 3465? Okay. And so just for clarity, 12% has been paid by future development. And so the 88% that has not yet been paid for. The interest and the principal, if you will, amount for that is being paid by our existing users throughout South Huron. That's a question.
Ms. Work?
Through you, Mayor Finch. Yes, so as the debenture payments come up for these related debentures, it's paid for through the operating budget, the operating sewer budget.
Which basically means is that when we do a Watson study and we determine what our operating costs are, that's reflected in the fees that we are actually charging to our customers. Because if it's not developers, it's got to be users.
Yes, I believe that's correct.
Mr. Giverson, you have a comment?
Yes, through you, Mayor Finch. To balance out this discussion, it should be noted that some of these debentures, one in particular, is due to be paid off next year. So the London Road South debenture payments will cease in June 2024. So the costs do not continue for that debenture once it's paid off, but the bylaw lives on. So over half of that bylaw has been the oversizing development component has been repaid. And once the payments to the bylaw, which the current users would no longer incur that ongoing cost, but the remaining amount does continue on and will be repaid from any development.
Thank you, Mr. Giverson. Mr. Oak?
Yeah, thank you. So when the money comes in for the cost recovery, that money goes into the general operating for water or sewer or whatever it's for. And then that reduces. So at the end of the year, if there's a surplus in that category, then that goes into the reserve for that same water or sewer. Is that how the process works?
Ms. Warwick?
Through you, Mayor Finch. Yes, that's correct.
Okay, and to follow up if
Absolutely,
I
go
may.
ahead.
So the second bullet point there talked about with development of an additional 146 lots, the balance will be repaid. Now, that's not in the works by any means, is it? Right at the moment, how many is there that many units that are in that in Ken's planned subdivision there? Just wanting to double check that number.
Mr. Giverson?
Yes, through you, Mayor Finch. Coincidentally, that developer in Crediton has had a meeting with the municipal staff and is already proposing to move to his next phase, which is the internal subdivision, to build the first street and build street townhomes. So he is already moving forward with plans to add additional lots. So he has the 20 along Victoria that are all serviced and they are ready to go when he decides to start building homes. But that internal street, so we have that as recent, like that's very recent news. And that entire development has over 300 units in it. So Mr. Palin's entire land parcel we currently have a concept plan that has over 300 units. And he has also advised us that he is updating that plan as well to add more units so we can deal with the housing shortage, the housing crisis that we actually have right now, to add them into an affordable market. So short answer to your question, yes, a lot more than this. And yes, he is in discussions with municipality now about proceeding with the next phase internal to the subdivision.
Thank you for your answer, Mr.
Thank you, Don.
Any other questions on this stuff? Mr. Counselor Dietrich, go ahead, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Don, I appreciate what you're doing here. When do they pay for that? When the lot's sold or?
Mr. Giverson?
All these bylaws are a little different, but in the Crediton and Centralia bylaw, the charge is $10,759.99. I don't know why it's stuck in my head, but so that $10,000 connection fee per lot is paid at the time of issuance of the building permit.
Okay, thank you.
The London Road South is structured so it's paid at the earliest of a planning approval or site plan or by at the building permit stage. So the South Point subdivision that's behind Jessica's house, it was paid at the time that he registered his next phase. He paid the amount in full for his share.
Thank you. Counselor Oak?
So is for South Point, then is that phase 1 and 2 then he's paid for?
Through you, Mayor Finch, that is correct. It's a substantial amount of the 250,000. But that is correct. Both phases have been paid, and you will notice that there hasn't been a house built in phase 2 yet. But we have been paid for his share of the debenture.
Thank you very much, Mr. Giverson, for all that information. Any other questions on this file? Mr. Oak?
So just Don, maybe you could let me know if, for example, if we didn't have sewers in Crediton, how many houses could you put on that same property that he's thinking 300 units? You know, because if they had to be on septic and do the same type of scenario, you know, and it might not be a number that you can come up with, but how is it, like half the number of houses or even lower? I don't know. I'm just asking.
Mr. Rolfe, welcome. Go ahead, sir.
Thank you. And through you, Mayor, it would be substantially less. I can definitely tell you that. Through the draft plan subdivision, there will be studies, nitrate studies in particular, that will determine the minimum area for the septic system that would be required as well as the house. So it would be substantially less than the 300 that's proposed now.
Thank you very much. Go ahead, Mr. Giverson. You had something?
Through you, Mayor Finch, we had a very similar situation with a plan of subdivision in Centralia. It's on the north side of Huron Park Road, west of Victoria. And it was originally designed for septic systems. And off the top of my head, I believe there were 20 lots. And now that sewers have been extended to Crediton and Centralia, the number of lots can quadruple. So you know, 4 times. I think the pretty rough numbers that to have a lot that's sized for a septic system. Mike is the OBC expert, but I believe you have to have a suitable space to have a replacement system. So it is considerably larger. My estimate would be 4 times the size of a lot that's serviced on municipal servicing.
And thank you very much, Mr. Giverson. Follow up.
So yeah, so that investment in the sewer is now coming. It's an investment that was made a number of years ago with the idea that build it and they will come, and it's now coming.
Mr. Giverson?
Yes, through Mayor Finch, that's a very good analogy. It does take a while. This is very much like planning for your retirement. You don't start at 65, you start hopefully when you're a 20-year-old. But this is a long-term investment. It does take a while to get going. But if you don't have it, if you don't do this, then you have nothing. You can't do this kind of development without laying the foundation to really spawn this kind of development activity. So even the London Road South, which took a while to start catching on, once it goes, it really gets going. So Crediton and Centralia, nobody was doing anything for development in those communities until full municipal services were made available. And then that presented the opportunity for growth and development.
Thank you for that answer, Mr. Giverson. Any other questions? Okay, not seeing. We'll move on to the next slide, please.
Question number 4. How have these recoveries been used and what expenses have they covered?
Questions for staff? Oh, Councillor Oak.
I guess I'm just.
Yeah, very well. Do you have a question in regards to that then?
Yeah.
Oh, can you turn your microphone on, please?
So this first phase of the Trident development or Soul Haven looks like it will take care of the Grand Bend cost recovery bylaw 50/2017, the way this is reading.
Mr. Giverson?
Yes, through you, Mayor Finch, that is one reason that development is very important to the municipality. We have invested considerable amounts of money in a sewage plant joint with our partners Lambton Shores and an upgrade to the force main and upgrades to the main pump station in Grand Bend. And then the fourth component is phase 1 of the trunk sewer. So the South Huron has invested a lot of money in infrastructure from the sewage plant, force main, pump station, and the trunk sewer going from PS2 across the behind the Legion up Municipal Drive and on Ontario Street. There's millions that have been invested for this very opportunity that now presents itself to us. So a portion of phase 1 will allow us to recover the growth component that was in PS2, force main, and sewage plant alone. The trunk sewer phase 1, the oversizing growth component is in the DC charges bylaw. So that growth component decision made by council in 2020 to recover that component through the DC charges. This cost recovery bylaw is for those other components. This one, a part of the Soul Haven subdivision, will repay the entire amount that's been deferred. So in one fell swoop, you can recover all the growth component for that one cost recovery bylaw.
Thank you very much, Mr. Giverson, for that answer. Any other questions? Councillor Vaughn, go ahead, please.
Yeah, just some clarity, Don, you're saying, so for both of the Oakwood Inn sewage bylaw, what was deferred for future, and with the Grand Bend STF recovery bylaw, the first phase of Tridon would pay for all of that future development that was deferred. Is that what I think I heard?
Mr. Giverson?
Through you, Mayor Finch, no, let me be clear. I
Okay.
did not say
Okay.
the Oakwood Inn sewage service bylaw. That is specifically for the temporary pumping station. And there was a small amount that was allocated for future growth. So no, I'm not saying that. It's the Grand Bend sewage treatment plant. This cost recovery bylaw 50-2017 that has the main pump station in Grand Bend, PS2, the force main, and the sewage plant. The biggest share, the biggest part of this cost is for the sewage plant. So this is normally referred to as the Grand Bend STF cost recovery because the majority of the cost is for the sewage treatment facility.
Thank you very much, Mr. Giverson. Follow up, Councillor Vaughn?
No.
No. Thank you. Councillor Oak?
And just for clarity, that the first part, the Oakwood Inn sewage service bylaw, that 35 residential units, is that the property with the tennis courts?
Mr. Giverson?
Is that the understanding with that, or could you just clarify that with?
So through you, Mayor Finch, no, the tennis court lands is the capacity for the tennis court lands is being carried or paid for by Oakwood Inn and Resort. So Oakwood Inn and Resort, the debenture that, and the amount that they are paying, because they were the owners of these properties, they initiated this in order to develop those properties, well, specifically to sell them so they could be developed. So their share of this debenture, and in this cost recovery bylaw, was for the Oakwood Links condominium, 27 units there, 27 condo units, and then 150 apartment units on the Oakwood tennis court lands. So this is for an additional growth component outside of what Oakwood Inn are paying for on taxes for the debenture.
Thank you very much, Mr. Giverson, for that answer. Any other questions? Councillor Dietrich, go ahead, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Why is none of the Oakwood Inn sewage been repaid when they have these other units that you're just mentioning there?
Mr. Giverson?
Yeah, so through you, Mayor Finch, the Oakwood Links, Oakwood Inn and Resort chose in their negotiations for this agreement to debenture over a long term, over 40 years, for the full cost. That was their choice to do it that way. So that's why in choosing that method of repayment, they decided to move forward to sell the land that the Oakwood Links condos were built on to a London-based developer so they could recover or reap the cost of the sale of the land. The tennis court land has never been developed, so it's still sitting there waiting for development. But Oakwood Inn and Resort, they're paying for the capacity in that pump station for that land. This is one of the contentious issues between different parties on who owns what and who has rights to what with that pump station. But this is their choice to pay it that way. The municipality at the time decided to add 35 condo units as a future growth if it ever occurred outside of Oakwood Inn's properties. Oh, that's clear enough, or?
Great, thank you very much, Mr. Giverson. Any other questions before we move on to the next slide? Okay, Ms. Collison, next slide, please.
Question 4, how have these recoveries been used and what expenses have they covered?
Any questions in regards to this slide? Okay, not seeing any. Next slide, please.
Is a municipal act cost recovery bylaw the only means of recovery available to the municipality?
Any questions for staff on this one? Councillor Oak.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. I'm just wondering, since we have Watson on here, I'm just wondering if they could go through the various the charts that we have in our package here and sort of explain the advantages and disadvantages here of the different methods.
I see Andrew is showing up there.
Welcome, Mr. Grunda. Whenever you're ready, can you respond to that question, please?
Sure, I'd be glad to do that. It's a pleasure to be here before you this evening, or this afternoon, I guess. So generally in the materials that we've provided, there's two major mechanisms that you have before you to consider. One is recovering the growth-related costs of the oversizing from either a development charge that would be imposed under the authority of the Development Charges Act, or imposing the charge under a municipal cost recovery bylaw, which would be imposed under Section 391, which is the authority under the Municipal Act.
Andrew, I'm not so sure if everybody can understand you. You seem a little mumbled. Maybe if you change your distance to the microphone, please.
Sorry, I was trying to get a little closer. How's that?
Let's try that.
Is that a little better? Apologize.
Nope, no worries.
Yeah, so what I was saying is there's primarily two mechanisms: development charges under the Development Charges Act, or a municipal cost recovery bylaw under the authority of the Municipal Act. And the general approach that we see in most municipalities is a preference for development charges, in that is the principal funding mechanism that we see in municipalities for recovery of growth-related costs. It has a separate statute that relates to that. The Municipal Act provisions are a section that you use for all of your fees and charges, such as your water and sewer rates. So while it is permissible, it is slightly different in that respect, that it's not specifically geared to growth-related capital cost recovery. So in that respect, I think that starting with just looking at those two mechanisms and the major difference between them. So development charges has a methodology that's required, a statutory public process and background study that's required to be undertaken. That methodology and adherence to that methodology in preparing the bylaw and adopting the bylaw can be appealed. And once that bylaw is put into force, there's a number of rules that are required on its implementation that municipalities have to adhere to. And I'll go into that in some further detail in a moment. With respect to the Municipal Act does not have a prescribed methodology that has to be adhered to. So it is up to the municipality to determine if those charges are reasonable and how you determined assigning that benefit, in this case, to those developable lands. Also, the charges cannot be appealed to the Ontario Land Tribunal like development charges can be. However, they can be appealed to the Ontario courts and the bylaw potentially quashed if felt that that bylaw is illegal. So different legal tests in that regard. And because the provisions of the Municipal Act are more broad, there's a lot less limitations. So there are no limitations with respect to, for example, how capital costs are defined, or how those charges are imposed and potential limitations to those. So one is very specific. The other one is much more broad and flexible in that respect. So I'll just go through the development charge sort of advantages and disadvantages that you see on the screen. And basically, under the development charges category, there are sort of three considerations here. One is including the oversized component for this project in your existing bylaw, your existing development charges bylaw that you have in place today. And you can do that by amending the bylaw. So it's very narrow in that you just undertake the statutory process to add in those additional capital costs, recalculate the charge, and update the bylaw accordingly. The other approach is, which I'll get to in a minute because of some of the changes in the legislation, if you felt that it would not be advantageous to do an amendment to the bylaw at this time, and you wanted to wait until you undertook an entire new bylaw, then that could be accommodated as well, which would allow you to broaden the scope and include these works when you consider the growth-related needs for all services in the municipality, such as roads, water, parks, recreation, and the like. And then the other alternative way I've presented it here is that when you're imposing a bylaw, you can either impose a bylaw on a municipal-wide basis like you currently do today, or you can impose it on an area-specific basis, meaning a much smaller geography for the area to which the works relate. So with that, on the screen, as you can see, with respect to development charges, so again, it has the statutory requirements the public process, public meeting requirements, the appeal requirements that are required in the Development Charges Act. The benefits of using development charges is that, as mentioned by Mr. Giberson, the phase one trunk works for the Grand Bend sewer are already in the municipal DC bylaw for recovery. And so this would continue to maintain having an average cost for new development to pay towards wastewater services. So it doesn't look at it on a development by development basis, but looks at it more on a service basis that identifies the growth related costs of development generally or on average in the municipality. Also within the development charge legislation, it has specific provisions for front ending. So if you were to enter into an agreement with the landowner, Trion, to upfront some of these works, it provides for that. It allows them to provide for all of those upfront, to receive credits against payments later. It allows for those credits and that front ending to occur specifically within the statute. So it doesn't require any additional legal agreements beyond those that are permissible there under the legislation. The other benefit of putting it in the current bylaw today is that when you're collecting these charges, you're collecting them from all development on the wastewater system. And so you're not waiting for development specifically in this area to which the phase two trunk would apply to receive that revenue to pay for those costs. So it helps you from a cash flow perspective because you have a much broader source of financing for those works across development of the municipality as a whole. It's also beneficial in that, again, because it is a separate statute that particularly is looking at funding from growth. These bylaws have to be updated periodically. They can be amended at any time there's a change in assumption. So those changes in capital costs, for example, as you move from estimates to actual, can continue to be updated and included in the bylaw and collected for changes in circumstances. Also, an advantage of development charges is that the development charges themselves are applicable law, which means the municipality can withhold the issuance of a building permit until those development charges are paid. And if they allow the development to proceed without them being paid, there is a default mechanism to collect them from taxes. And I think the emphasis here is that because you can restrict the building permits, you're having the charges paid by the builder. If they default to taxes, sometimes that ownership may transfer to the homeowner at that point. And so now that obligation is transferred from the builder to the homeowner. The disadvantages to DC is, so even though these are the common tool that's used by municipalities, I think the principle.
Mr. Gund, if you could lean closer to the microphone, you're starting to get distance again there.
Again, I apologize for that. So the principal disadvantage with the development charges is more as a result of recent legislative changes. And that is the recent legislative changes that we've seen now that say when a municipality passes a bylaw, that the full amount that's determined in that charge for the bylaw cannot be collected until year 5 that bylaw is in effect. There's a mandatory phase-in that has to be adhered to, that in the first year of that bylaw, you can only collect 80% of that charge. In year 2, 85% of that charge. Year 3, 90%. Year 4, 95%. So you don't receive full cost recovery until year 5. And that lost revenue on the development that occurs in those years, that cannot be made up by increasing the development charges on years 5 through 10. That is a cost that has to be paid for from a non-development charge source. So in this case, paid for by wastewater ratepayers. And I think that is probably the most notable disadvantage around development charges. In addition to that, there are also what's referred to as statutory exemptions. So under the Development Charges Act, there are certain types of development that you cannot impose development charges on. So for example, if you had an industrial plant expansion or industrial building expansion, the first 50% of the floor area of that expansion does not pay development charges. What's more notable are the recent legislative changes around affordable housing. And so recent legislation is bringing forward exemptions for affordable housing so that when it's in effect, if a development is either being sold or rented at an affordable rate, as the province will determine through what's referred to as its bulletin, then development charges will be exempted on those properties. And so again, those exemptions are exemptions that have to be funded by a non-DC source. And so again, further funding requirements from rates. And so I think it's important in those aspects that unlike what you've been talking about generally before, where you have what we refer to as interim financing, where you have the rate base, paying for costs of growth, but will ultimately be repaid by these funding mechanisms. And so you're really talking about cash flow. In these cases, these are funding requirements. So these are shortfalls that will not be paid for by development charges and will have to be paid for by ratepayers. So that is the fundamental drawback, irrespective of if you're amending or if you are passing a new bylaw or if you're passing an area-specific bylaw. If you're using the Development Charges Act, those exemptions and phase-in apply. More specifically, with respect to this amending process, this phase-in applies not only on new bylaws. So when your current bylaw is set to expire and needs to be replaced, the phase-in would apply in that case, but it also applies now on amendments. And the legal opinions that we've received on this is that even if you were just going into your bylaw to adjust the wastewater charge, when you pass that amending bylaw, you'd have to phase in all of the services in that bylaw, starting at that 80% rate from the first year of the amending process. So that is important to note as a distinction when I then move to the next piece around if you did not want to fund this by adding it to your current bylaw through an amending process, the other alternative is to wait until your bylaw is going to be updated more comprehensively so that you bear the phase-in at that point in time once you've reconsidered the capital needs for roads, parks, recreation, and the rest. And so that's the start of this next component under the DC. And so again, it's the same statutory requirements. The trunk works would be added, but it would also allow you to revisit the needs for all of your services in passing a new bylaw. So it'd be more comprehensive. So the thinking being that if you're going to have to incur the phasing cost under the legislation, at least now you would be doing that in the full view of what the current costs would be going forward. And so potentially the cost increases may offset those phases relative to at least the imposition of the charges on development. What the Act requires, though, is that if you want to move forward at this point in time with the phase 2 trunks, to be able to include it in a future DC bylaw after those works are in operation, then you must clearly have an expression of council when these works are being undertaken that you will recover this oversized component from a future development charge. And so again, that's something that I would highlight, that if council wants to use DCs as the mechanism, doesn't want to do it through an amendment, wants to continue to have it funded on a service-wide basis like you currently do for a lot of the works that you have, then waiting to do that in the future when you do a more fulsome review would just require this expression of council. And so what that would mean, again, is that you have to interim finance that, but you would ultimately include that cost in a future DC update. And so by doing that, the benefit obviously is that you're incurring less of that phasing cost because you would have reconsidered the needs for all the other services as well as just adding this one project in the amendment process earlier. Other than that, the advantages and disadvantages are principally the same. The other option to you under a municipal act, under the Development Charges Act, is not to amend your bylaw or pass a new municipal-wide bylaw, but to pass very separate area-specific bylaw that would only look at the costs related to the Phase 2 trunk works and have them applied to a specific benefiting area. And so the benefit here is that those costs are being paid for directly by those lands that will derive the direct benefit from them. So it doesn't have any cost sharing amongst other service areas of the municipality. The disadvantages, other than the ones that we've already highlighted, is that those funds that you're collecting through this bylaw are maintained in a separate reserve fund to be used to fund these works. And so the payback that you're going to get in terms of revenue from these area-specific development charges is what you're going to use to fund those costs. And so that repayment of that roughly $600,000 may be longer, it may be shorter, but because now it's only going to be tied to the development in that respective area, as opposed to this broader funding pool that you would have in your current DC that's collecting money from the entire wastewater system in that respect. And so also having another area specific bylaw has some misalignment or a different alignment from the current area specific approach that you have. And so there's some question around, from a policy perspective, having a municipal wide DC for some aspects of the service and area specifics for others, and the continuity of that. So I think that that's more of a policy consideration. And then also there's the additional administration of these reserve funds that are required. And so again, that is looking at sort of the DCs. And so again, largely the DCs are the common approach. The principal disadvantage around them, again, is the rules and the phases that have to be adhered to. So that full recovery may not occur, especially if development happens in the first 5 years of the bylaws initiative. On the next page, in terms of the Municipal Act charges, again, because there is no statutory requirement in terms of the methodology that has to be adhered to, there is more discretion for council to determine the appropriate process and calculation approach in determining the charge. Again, it does not have the same appeal entitlements that a development charge has. It tends to be a bit of a higher threshold through the Court of Appeal, from my understanding, as opposed to appeal risk in that regard, but is something, again, that needs to be considered in using this tool. The principal advantage of using Municipal Act charges compared to a DC is that you do not have those phase-in requirements and those statutory exemption requirements. So these charges can be fully imposed at the rate that you determine starting day one that the bylaw is in effect. And if affordable housing or industrial expansions or other types of development occur, those charges can be fully levied on those by the municipality. Also, another benefit is that within this definition of wastewater services, under development charges, you cannot include studies in those costs anymore, but you would be able to include any study costs related to this phase 2 that expansion project as part of a municipal act charge. So the capital definition is a bit broader in that respect, if that applies. As I mentioned earlier, one of the drawbacks is that it not being applicable law, you cannot restrict building permits from being issued without payment of the charge. However, because they are priority lien status, they can be collected as taxes. Again, the concern here being if the ownership transfers and now it's being paid for by a homeowner as opposed to a builder or developer.
We're kind of losing you there, Andrew. Can you lean closer to your mic, or you're kind of muffled there?
The other benefit of municipal act charges, which is what we've seen in some of the other bylaws imposed by the municipality, is that a development charges act is applied on development that triggers a building permit or different types of development applications. The benefit of a municipal act charge is that it can be equally applied on developments that don't go through those same development triggers. So in some cases where the service would benefit not only new development, but may benefit current customers on septic systems that would want to convert to the municipal system, then you can equally apply this charge to both new development and to those private service conversions under that bylaw mechanism. So that's an advantage that a development charge doesn't have. Trying to recover that, what we would call benefit to existing component for the private service conversion, would have to be facilitated through a separate municipal act bylaw if the growth is recovered from DCs. The disadvantages, as we see them, obviously, as I spoke about earlier, similar to the area specific charges, is just sort of this broader alignment from a policy perspective of having a uniform average cost charge for all wastewater development in the community, as your development charges bylaw provides for. Another drawback of the municipal act charge, again, is because it doesn't have the same prescriptive nature that development charges has. There is no term to the bylaw. So sometimes going in and making adjustments for actual costs or changes in assumptions, updating those bylaws are possible and obviously can be replaced, but it doesn't have the same sort of overall updating provisions that a development charges act has. So sometimes that can see bylaws continue on without recovering full actual costs unless that amending process goes forward. We talked about the applicable law and the transfer, and then in terms of the scope, so limiting the scope for the the smaller benefiting area might make this administratively easier. So having a front-ending party that is willing to pay for their cost share, you can then take this residual oversized amount, apply it to the remaining lands, and so they're completely separate and independent in that respect, that there is no need to include those costs in a broader municipal charge that has to then concern itself with credits and payback to the front-ending party. So sometimes that can make that administratively easier, similar to an area-specific DC for facilitating those transactions. So that's sort of a summary. So I guess in a nutshell, the key distinction is one will provide for full cost recovery. The other, being the DCs, may have less than full cost recovery depending on the timing of development. Obviously, having a broader collection area as opposed to a smaller collection area is going to provide a broader source of funding support in that respect. And then also, the consideration of the broader policy connectivity of trying to have uniform charges being incurred by development as opposed to areas having different separate charges and different rates that would apply to them, which may provide for economic incentives or disincentives in the location of development, and then possibly result in cash flow implications as a result. So hopefully that summarizes the material that we provided.
Thank you very much, Andrew. Mr. Oak, you had a comment.
Yeah, just And for probably staff, when is our DC study due to be updated?
Mr. Sue Colson?
The DC study is actually in the budget for 2024.
That's what I thought. And so, because the way the charts were looking is that it's a hefty penalty to do an amending bylaw as far as the phase in. So it's definitely something on anything that we're looking at right at the moment to wait until such time. Now, with the amount that the split that we're looking at or that's being proposed to us is the 1.8 million and the 600,000. Now that 600,000, can that be deferred to take a look until such time as the DC study is in process, or what is the timeline that we have to handle that the 600 if we were to go that route?
Ms. Sue Colson?
And that was one of the things that Andrew kind of covered, was that if it's council's intention to include the project as a DC charges or cost recovery, there would be a resolution of council needed. And in that consideration, then it could be included into a new bylaw even after construction. That's correct, Andrew, or?
Andrew, just
Sir, yes, that is correct. You would want to have that expression of council through that resolution, so that under the Development Charges Act, it's referred to as committed excess capacity, and therefore would not prevent it from being included in future DC.
thank you very much, Andrew. Any other questions, Councillor Vaughn?
Yes, and so if we went that way, like to have a resolution and include this at a later date when we did the DC study, how does that work in terms of where would we be able to take monies received from a developer like Tridon and apply it to the recovery of the 600,000, or are we looking at a totally different future customer base for those funds recovery?
Andrew?
Yes, and so again, I think it depends on how you construct it, in the sense that if you were identifying, so I think the first thing you would do is you would have the expression of council so that you could consider this in a bylaw at a later point in time. Then, depending on how that negotiation proceeds in terms of the form in which you would get the upfront funding of the 1.8 million, that would then inform how you would include these costs in a DC bylaw. Because again, if in one aspect, you would include the entirety of the project, including that upfronted amount, and then you would have to work with the developer around credits for the 1.8 million that would be provided. Or the other alternative is that you might want to consider that as a separate area-specific bylaw or an area-specific treatment within the municipal bylaw for those specific works. There's a number of considerations that you'd have to account for in terms of how you would include those. But if you wanted to include it as a DC at a later point in time, that council expression through that resolution would give you enough room to be able to make those determinations.
Thank you. Follow up?
Yes, and so when would we as a council need to have such a resolution?
You have to have the resolution before the works are in operation. So typically, as you know, part of a budget approval for a project, but definitely before the project is in operation, you need to make sure that you have that expression.
Okay, so either at the budget time or before the actual project commences, you would need to make that known. Okay, and this is definitely an awful lot of information to unpack in one short sentence, and thanks for your presentation, but I did have a really tough time following everything that you were saying. So in order to help council make the decision about which way to go, because there's obviously two different ways to go. How do we go about getting some sort of mathematical or what if type scenarios to actually show us how this might work?
Mr. Giverson, do you want to comment, or Andrew, would you like to take that?
Oh, through you, Mayor Finch, which at the end of the presentation outlines the best path forward for council to act. Like, this is a lot of information from Andrew, and he is the DC expert, and he is also our financial consultant. So there are two things happening in 2024. The rate study is due to be updated. And the DC charges background study is due to be updated because the bylaw expires in March 2025. Okay. So the resolution that's proposed at the end of the presentation for the next steps gives council all the time you need and presents both options that are available. So you can fully consider when Andrew can appear in person, then you can ask more questions about the pros and cons of both approaches, because there are advantages and disadvantages of both approaches. But the suggested resolution allows both options. So it allows that option to express the interest of council to include it in a future DC charges bylaw. You have all of next year when Andrew's doing the DC charges background study to go through the information, ask all the questions, take as much time as necessary to determine if, and all the numbers, financial information that comes back to determine if, is that the best path to take? At the same time, the questions about the capital cost recovery bylaw options, you have all of next year to do that. So the Municipal Act capital budget or Municipal Act capital cost recovery bylaw is done at the end of the project when all the costs are known. So that will not happen until the end of 2024. Expressing your interest now in potentially adding that to the DC charges bylaw at the next update allows the DC charges consultant to add that in the future DC charges bylaw by expressing your interest now. So the draft resolution giving both options is the way to cover this off. Keep your options open. Whatever you decide to do, this will allow both to take place, and you have all of next year, like all of 2024 to do that. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Oak.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. Just to clarify what Councillor Vaughn was asking there about the DC charges for Tridon. They wouldn't be paying these if they're paying their share of the pipe of 1.8 million or whatever. We're only talking about the 600,000 in whether that would end up in the DC charge or cost recovery bylaw if we go that route. Either way, but Tridon, unless they develop something else down the road, but what they've got for phase 1 and potentially phase 2 and across the road potentially, that would all be covered already with the 1.8 million that they're contributing. Is that how I understand that?
Mr. Giverson.
Yes, through you, Mayor Finch. I'll dive in there before I keep Andrew out of trouble here. We cannot double dip. So if Tridon is paying the 1.8 mil to service their phase 1 and phase 2, the tennis court lands is outside of this. So phase 1 and phase 2 is what they're paying the 1.8 mil. So when the DC charges background study is done and the 600,000 for oversizing is added, we can't charge that portion again to Tridon. So it makes our life, it'll make Julia's life a little more difficult because you have to calculate a credit. Like if you're charging them the full DC charges, we legally can't charge them twice for the same property. So whatever that amount increases in the DC charges for the 600, they would have to get a credit back for that. And I would defer to Andrew. He's the absolute expert in this area.
Thank you. Andrew, do you want to comment or?
Sure.
That's fine.
Yeah, I think what Don is saying is fine. It's obviously a bit complicated in terms of how you would structure it. And I think to answer the councilor's question earlier, I think what, again, if I could offer an opinion or advice, I think would be.
Yeah, Andrew, again, we're not quite hearing you, broken up there. I'm sure. Are you satisfied with Mr. Guybruns's answer? Is that okay?
Yes, and I can just say that through that process, I think you could, council would be informed in terms of what the options are to make an informed decision.
Great, thank you. Any other comments at this time on that question? Councillor Dietrich?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Now I forget what I was gonna say. What percentage of the DC charges can go towards this project? Or is that governed by a bylaw? Like we have other things like fire trucks and whatever that kind of thing would go towards as well, eh? Like just like is it has to be a percentage or can it be the whole whatever it's set at?
Mr. Guybrunsson?
Through you, Mayor Finch, I'll take a stab at this. The DC charge per single family lot is approximately $5,000.
Yeah, just touch over.
The sewer component is roughly $800 of the, so what we would charge a builder for a single family lot. So the difference, the 4,200, that pays for other things like fire hall, new fire trucks. There's rec component. So all those other things are in that $4,200 portion. So that cannot be used for sewers. The $800 when the DC charge consultant adds the $600,000 onto the other projects that are in there, then that $800 will increase by, and I don't know the amount, but that $800 would increase by a few $100 more. And it's only that portion that can be used for sewers. So the other portions cannot be used. It has to go for those dedicated rec or fire use. Right.
Great, thank you. Any other comments before I move on to the next slide? Councillor Neeb, go ahead.
Yep, thank you, Mayor Finch. And again, it's good to know that there's other cost recovery options that are available to council. I guess just based on what I've been hearing and what we've been stating, some of these are administratively complex and could potentially add more staff time. So I'm just wondering, is that the reason why the cost recovery bylaw option was presented as opposed to DC charges or any other method?
Mr. Guybrunsson?
Yes, through Mayor Finch. The number one reason staff recommended the Municipal Act cost recovery bylaw, it is simple. It does capture both growth and existing properties. So if we go the DC charges route to recover the growth, then we still have to pass a cost recovery bylaw in order to recover from Southwest Marine, for example. So it'll be some doubling up. It's just a little extra work because there's another bylaw and another cost to monitor and recover. The complications, I don't have to worry about this. Mike and Julia have to do all the work, figuring out the credit back when there's a house built in Soul Haven for the difference between the 800 share and whatever the $600,000 are going to add. That's extra work for our treasurer and for our CBO. So it's more complicated. There's more work, and we have to pass more bylaws. And the more stuff that's out there, the more chances that something will get missed. But the biggest reason that Andrew has already pointed to is the DC charges bylaw. With the current legislation, the minute it's passed, you can only recover 80% of the cost. There's phase in. So you do a cost recovery bylaw. Yes, it's area specific, but you recover 100% of the cost that you determine, not through a calculation, not through DC where it all has to be justified. There's a whole process to go through. You decide how quickly you want to recover it or how long you want to recover. That charge could be $2,000. It could be $6,000. If it's $6,000, you're going to get that back very quickly. If you make it $2,000, it'll be a lot slower. So the phasing in, and then all the other new rules there's around the DC charges bylaw. Andrew alluded to them, but he didn't spell them right out. So there are exemptions. There are ones that are deferred. You want to get horribly complicated. If it's rental and you can defer, Mike knows this a lot better than I do, but there's new things in the legislation that make DC charges not the pot of gold that people think they are. Deferring, recovering less, phasing in, waiting years to get it up to 100%. So those are the reasons we put that forward. But to be really clear with council, it's your choice, and the options are there. And there are the pros and cons to either one. But the beauty of this, with Andrew's help as an expert, a provincial expert in this area, you have a pathway forward. So you can choose either option that you wish. You don't have to take our suggestion, but we put it forward in good faith as this is a simple way. It covers all the bases. You collect 100%. You don't have to phase in, but it is area specific.
Thank you. Mr. Oak.
I guess if the full study is up for renewal, then the phase in isn't an issue.
Mr. Garrison.
Is that how I thought I understood it?
I'd like to answer first, and then Mike wants to respond as well. So that is absolutely correct. The DC charges bylaw expires in 2025. So we would have to carry these costs by some other method until they can be then included in the future bylaw. And Mike is going to explain how we are going to propose to deal with some of these issues about changes and updates and phasing and how we can try to manage some of that.
Mr. Rolfe.
Thank you, through you, Mayor. So just to clarify, anytime we open up the DC bylaw, regardless if it's an amendment to the current bylaw or through the new bylaw or through an area specific bylaw, like what Andrew was talking about, that phasing approach is triggered. Okay, so with the new bylaw that's going to come in 2025, it will be phased in over a 5-year period, 80%, 85, 90, 95% to 100. One of the considerations that staff is proposing or looking into right now to alleviate maybe this in the future, if we do open up a bylaw after the new one gets passed, will be to have multiple bylaws. A bylaw for fire, a bylaw for water, a bylaw for sanitary. And then if we need to open up one, we're not affecting the others the DC costs.
Thank you, Mr. Rolfe. Any other questions? Okay, Councillor Vaughn.
Yeah, okay, so Don, you mentioned that the DC charges a flat 5,000 per lot, and only a subset of that is for actual sewage works. So my question actually is, with the deferred terms we have for some of the projects right now, like the Grand Bend PS2 and the plant, I believe it was something around $4,800 per hookup, just for new lots. So are you basically saying that if we were to take a development charge of 5,000 per lot, which covers a multitude of different services, that we would not be able to charge the $4,800 hookup? That would be double dipping?
Go ahead.
No, through you, Mayor Finch. No, The cost recovery bylaw for the sewage plant, PS2, is collected regardless. So that's separate outside of DC charges. So that's a cost recovery bylaw that will be charged, that would be collected on everything that's built in the service area, including Soul Haven subdivision. It's the double dipping is the DC charge, which Mike will have the exact number, but it's a little over $5,000 total, which includes fire, rec, and other projects. Approximately $800 of that DC charge is for sewer works. I know the future expansion of the extra sewage lagoon is in there. There's a couple other sewage related projects. So the 600,000 for the growth component, the oversizing for the trunk sewer would be added in, calculated into the DC charges. Andrew is the expert on exactly how much that would have, but that would just add to the $800 that's within that 5,000 charge. And it's that little component that we can't double dip with Soul Haven because they're already paying the 1.8 mil for everything for phase 1 and phase 2. Okay, so the sewage plant cost recovery bylaw unchanged. That $4,800 per connection or per dwelling unit remains, and it's collected on its own, unchanged. It's just the DC charge and that increase in the wastewater component. And I know now Mike now has the exact numbers.
Mr. Wolf, did you want to comment?
Yes, through you, Mayor. The exact numbers are for a single and semi-detached dwelling in a urban area. The total DC charge is $5,635. The total wastewater services portion of that $5,635 is $840. Okay, roughly 15.5%-ish, maybe a touch less. And then just for council's knowledge, within our DC's bylaw, there is a provision in there that says we shall increase the DC charges annually by the construction index. And I don't know if Julia knows what that is, but I know Kate is working on that to have it updated for January 1, 2024. So there will be a little bit more next year.
Okay, thank you. Any follow-up? Thank you.
Yes, sure. Okay, so I just wanted to go back and get clarity on the double dipping piece that you talked about. So with what's before us now, Triton is looking at $1.8 million in terms of paying for the trunk sewer. So are you saying that we can't have both in terms of we can have 5,000 per lot? And if we choose to go that route through development charges, we are not there. Triton is not paying the $1.8 million for the trunk line? No.
Mr. Giverson.
Through you, Mayor Finch. So the $5,635 for a single family lot DC charge, that amount stays. That's in our current bylaw. That's what they're going to be charged. So the sewer component of that, the $840, does not include anything to do with the phase 2 of the trunk sewer. There's no money in there in the current DC charge for that. So the developer is paying 1.8 mil to have the capacity for its phase 1 and phase 2 of Soul Haven. The additional 600,000 is for growth outside beyond Soul Haven. So if council decides to add it to the DC charges, it would be calculated in and become part of this component that's now $840. Andrew will calculate. Did you tell me it was over 40 years, or it's over a long period of time they calculate it, and we include about 0.25%. So it's a long haul to get the money out even through DC charges. But Andrew is the expert. He would calculate it, and it would be added to this $840. So it's that little bit that's added that we can't charge twice because they already paying for their component of that trunk sewer extension.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Giverson. Any follow-up?
Just one more. Okay, but all right, so the 600,000 outside of Soul Haven development, they're not paying any part of that 600,000 through development charges?
Through you, Mayor French, that would be correct, because they're already paying the 1.8 million for their entire share of the trunk sewer extension.
Right.
So everybody else gets to pay for their share of this 600,000.
Okay, so that assumes that we have everybody else's, we have other people that actually will fit under that 600,000.
Yeah.
So we have customers,
Yeah,
more
through-
customers.
Yeah, through you, Mayor Finch. If council decides to include it in the DC charges bylaw, that means every time the DC charges bylaw is charged to any development throughout the entire municipality. That's if you choose an area-wide DC charges bylaw that you have now. If a house is built in Exeter, it's built in Crediton, doesn't matter where it is in the municipality. If they're on full municipal services, they would be charged as they are now with the current DC charges bylaw for phase 1 of the trunk sewer. That's in this, it's in this $840.
Thank you. Anything further from members of council? Okay, moving on to the next slide, please.
Question number 6, has a financial analysis been conducted on potential ratepayer costs?
Are there any questions on this one? Okay. Not seeing any. Thank you. Next one, please.
Question number 7, will the South Huron sewage system users be credited for fronting the costs of future development?
Any questions on this? Hey, Councillor Vaughn?
Yeah, just basically a comment. I'm just thinking in terms of, for the past, we have been including these costs in our, eventually including them in the fees that go to all our wastewater customers. And so I know in the case of like the water pipe, the Hensel water pipe that we have coming up the Highway 83, there's a specific amount of money that people pay in Exeter and Stephen and so forth. But when that's finally paid for, they no longer have a payment. And since it's all sort of blended in, if you will, with the fee structure through the Watson studies, will people ever actually see the end of any of these extra user fees they have paid waiting for development to occur?
Mr. Giverson or Julie, Ms. Warwick, who would like to take that?
Through you, Mayor Finch. So when we no longer have the expenses incurred related to the debentures and that kind of thing, as they're paid off, we no longer have the expense portion, but if we continue to recoup the revenue side via the cost recovery bylaw, that revenue then goes towards offsetting other expenses of the sewer or water division as a whole. But yet we don't have the offsetting expense at a later point in time.
Thank you. Any other questions? Okay, not seeing any. Thank you. We'll move on to the next slide.
Question number 8, has this project been captured as part of a development charges background study? Can South Huron collect both development charges and municipal cost recovery bylaw with a 25% deferred payment for the same project?
Any questions? Okay. Thank you. Oh, Councillor Vaughn, go ahead.
Yeah, just one comment. The staff response, yes, I took a look at the background study back in, I guess, 2020, but also in that grid, in that back charges, development charges background study, it also mentioned that we were looking at a sewage development plan, just like a master sewage plan. And I'm just wondering, haven't heard anything much about that lately and wondering where we might be on that.
Mr. Giverson.
Through you, Mayor Finch. I'd be happy to answer that question. Yeah, we're getting very close to the end. There was a notice of commencement that was issued about a month ago. The consultant is working towards completing the first, or getting all the documentation together. The public meeting components of the wastewater master plan are scheduled for, it'll be January, February. And we're looking at a back end date, a delivery date of well, it's approximately March. Our engineer who's working on the project has a deadline to meet at that time. So we're looking at March 2024. So that's the latest update there. As soon as we get to a stage where there would be a public consultation, then there will be more information put forward to council on the state of affairs with that master plan. It's important that we do get that master plan complete and up to date before we commence on the DC charges background study and the rates and charges bylaw, so it's up to date and current.
Thank you. Any other questions? Not seeing any. Thank you. Next slide, please.
Why is the oversizing of the pipe being pushed when a significant portion of the lands north of Highway 21 are AG1? Does the council wish to convert prime agricultural lands into development lands in a PII settlement area? What is the rationale?
Any questions from council? Okay, not seeing any. Next slide, please.
The issue of the secondary plan was a matter of much consternation with respect to Huron Meadows development. Ultimately, a settlement for phase 1 of the project was reached. Municipal planner stated that the proposed amendment to the South Huron OP does not remove the requirement for the secondary plan for the broader Port Blake planning area. In other words, the rationale to not proceed with the secondary plan for Salthaven appears to be that it was a singular property. The proposal before the council to justify oversizing represents multiple properties proposed to be developed. As a result, a secondary plan would be required. Is there an underlying reason why the council would not move forward with such a plan? What is the rationale?
Any questions for staff? Okay, not seeing any. Thank you. Ms. Masuda Carlson, anything further?
And these next few slides were as a result of another resolution to bring back more information on the Oakwood area sewage pumping station capacity.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions or comments from members of council at this time? Councilor Oak?
Just a question on the, so in our budget packages that we've had, this project, there's been 616,000 in the budget. Just wondering, and that 616 has been talked about coming out of a reserve. Just wondering, do we have money in the reserve to cover that as of the end of 2022? There was only 250,000 in there. Just wondering where we're at today.
Ms. Warwick?
Through you, Mayor Finch. Yes, we are estimating there will be enough in the reserves to cover everything that's proposed in the 2024 budget.
Thank you. Any other questions, comments from members of council? Okay, not seeing any. Ms. Masuda Carlson, next steps, please.
Okay, and we got the questions and the next steps here. So this is just an outline of some of the information that was provided as far as for next steps.
Questions from members of council? Councilor Dietrich.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Says here on the BM Ross report, pumping station for the Oakwood area sewage pumping station, 27 condominiums, 150 apartments, 35 condominiums. And I think from the previous council meeting we had, Dawn, you said something about that pumping station needing some repair.
Mr. Garvison?
Yes, through you, Mayor Finch. No, the pumping station does not require repair at this time. The pumping station as currently designed does not have the capacity to service phase one of the Solhaven subdivision.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions? Okay, not seeing any. Ms. Masuda Carlson? Anything next? Steps here?
Well, just procedurally, because I can read the last piece of the resolution. It basically had that council hold this committee of the whole and that these matters be presented and that the appropriate staff be in attendance to ensure that a fulsome discussion can occur. And then after that, and that was to be brought forward prior to any discussion, any further discussion or consideration of the resolution. So next steps would be, and I can defer to the clerk, if council, once council receives this report or the committee and council receives the minutes, then the original resolution would be back to council.
Madam Clerk?
Yeah, so the original recommendation from the committee of the whole, COW number 12/2023, that was deferred originally for further information. That would be brought back to council because that was deferred at a later date for this notice of motion. So that recommendation at the time, the committee did not actually pass a recommendation. They deferred it for council consideration, but that resolution recommendation was that South Huron Committee of the Whole recommends to council to approve the draft cost sharing agreement in principle, and that South Huron Committee of the Whole recommends to council that the mayor and clerk be authorized to sign a cost sharing agreement with Tridon Group Ltd. and Tridon Properties Ltd. for the extension of the Grand Bend Trunk Sewer, subject to approval of an associated budget. So that would be brought back to the next meeting for consideration.
So process, you need what do you need now?
Unless the committee wishes to make a recommendation, that's the recommendation that's going back to council for consideration.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Garvison?
Through you, Mayor Finch, there's a third recommendation that's recommended in the next step.
So yes, under this particular presentation, there was a third section to that recommendation that South Huron Committee of the Whole recommends to council to recover the oversizing costs through a future cost recovery bylaw, or recover the growth related costs by including this project in a future DC charges background study and future development charges bylaw.
Okay, thank you. Members of council, Councillor Neeb, you have something?
Just for clarification, so the first two paragraphs, are these separate recommendations then? The one for the DC recovery bylaw and the one for approving the draft cost sharing agreement, are those two separate recommendations then?
So through the chair,
Or
the
resolutions, sorry.
resolution. So on the screen here, the first two, so that South Huron Committee of the Whole recommends to council the approved draft cost sharing agreement in principle, and then regarding the authorization of the agreement, those were the original recommendations that the committee deferred at the last committee of the whole. So that recommendation is the one that will be brought back for council consideration at the next council meeting. However, if the committee was to choose to pass this recommendation with that final recommendation included, that could be the one council could consider at that time.
Okay, thank you. So we would need a mover is what you're saying then?
If the committee would like to make that recommendation, we would need a mover and seconder. And
Okay, Councillor Vaughn?
Yes.
Oh, your microphone, please.
Sorry. Yes, I'm just wondering if we can split up that whole recommendation. Because I can see right now where I would have vote one way on some of it and vote another way on other bits of it. So can we split that into two at least motions in terms of the first and second paragraph, and then another motion for the last one?
Very well. I will let the clerk prepare and then read the recommendation. Oh, so go ahead, Councillor. Oak.
Yeah, just a clarification as well. This is a recommendation from the committee of the whole, right? And council has the final decision at the next council meeting on these motions, right?
Yes, that's correct. So the committee can recommend to council and then council would then have the final decision and would have to pass the recommendation at the next meeting.
Very well. You can read that recommendation when you're ready, the first two.
So the first recommendation would be that South Huron Committee of the Whole recommends to council to approve the draft cost sharing agreement in principle, and that South Huron Committee of the Whole recommends to council that the mayor and clerk be authorized to sign a cost sharing agreement with Trident Group Ltd. And Trident Properties Ltd. For the extension of a Grand Bend trunk sewer, subject to the approval of an associated budget.
And as a remover, please, Councillor Neeb, seconded by Councillor Dietrich. Any discussion? Councillor Neeb, you moved it. Go ahead, please.
And I'd like to beg council's indulgence. I have a little bit of a blurb prepared that I'd like to go through. So if it's okay, I might be going past the 4 minutes. So
Any issues with members of council? Okay, thank you. Go ahead.
okay. Thank you to staff for providing the report to council. In my mind, it provides further justification to move forward with the proposal to oversize the Grand Bend trunk sewer extension. I believe that this is a long-term investment into our community with a lifespan of over 100 years. Oversizing this sewer extension makes sound economic sense. We will have the capacity to create additional housing with sewer services in this area, as well as allow current and future homeowners the ability to join into the system off of septic. This is not just economic development for the local economy, but also for the corporation of the municipality of South Huron and all of its residents. With development occurring in Lambton Shores, why shouldn't development occur in South Huron as well? Funding for this project comes from existing sanitary sewer reserves and is paid for exclusively by the sewer users. The tax levy and therefore tax rates and taxpayers are not paying for this extension. For all sewer users in Exeter, Crediton, Centralia, and Grand Cove, this is a benefit to them as the ability to add more users onto the system contributes to lower rates and costs due to volume of users. We received correspondence from residents in Grand Cove voicing concern about rising sewer rates. These increases in costs were approved by council in 2019 as part of a rate study in order to ensure we meet the needs of our assets in the future. The rising sewer rates can and will stabilize with responsible development that this extension can provide. Without it, rates will continue to rise. We should be concerned that not moving forward with the extension to allow development will allow the rates to continue to rise in Grand Cove. With the current housing crisis ongoing, many Canadians still do not have access to adequate housing. Council recently amended its official plan to allow for increased intensification and higher density builds. Having an additional sewer service area in the municipality of South Huron will increase our viability to create additional housing of all types. And I look forward to our official planning process to discuss how we can plan for additional housing in the settlement area. With a lifespan of 100 years, having the sewer extension and its oversizing will allow our municipality to create even more housing opportunities down the road without being hampered by lack of sewer service. Looking at the housing market today, or even population projections for the next 10 years, is short-sighted and ineffective. We must plan for the next 100 years. While some residents have stated that they are on septic and have no intention of joining, it does not preclude future property owners in the next 100 years wishing or needing to tie into a sewer system up Blue Water Highway. In preparing for the meeting tonight, I had the opportunity to review the 2018 to 2022 Council's June 22nd, 2020 Special Council meeting, in which we discussed Phase 1 of the sewer trunk line. At the time, staff advised all of Council that this trunk line was planning for the future and that building this trunk sewer was a calculated risk and an investment into the Grand Bend area. With road and bridge construction occurring in the area at the time, there were significant cost savings by moving forward at that time. A similar model of cost recovery was presented where 1.6 million would be borrowed from reserves to pay for this asset, but that if we built it, that we would have the potential to see development in the future, which would benefit existing users. And we have seen development. In a recorded vote on June 22nd, 2020, the 2018 to 2022 Council voted unanimously in favor of moving forward with Phase 1 of the trunk sewer. With a cost of $1.6 million to build, not paying for this extension is a loss of investment and development for our sewer users and our taxpayers. Not oversizing will result in increased costs to refit the sewer for future development, and it flies in the face of the commitment that Council made when we allocated $1.6 million towards Phase 1 of the trunk sewer in the first place. Staff have presented us with 3 questions moving forward about whether we wish to oversize to avoid additional costs in the future, whether we wish to enter into a cost-sharing agreement with the developer in order to achieve cost savings from doing the project all at once, and whether we wish to change the cost recovery method to something other than a cost recovery bylaw, which in my opinion becomes administratively complex and problematic for future residents, staff, and councils. Therefore, I'm fully in favor of moving ahead with this extension as it is a benefit to current and future residents in the Grand Bend area, as well as current and future residents of South Huron. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Neeb. Any other comments? Councillor Vaughn?
Yeah, thank you for that, Councillor Neeb. I have a couple of comments. I don't think I'll take 4 minutes, might when we get to our council meeting, but for now, just want to say a couple of things in terms of the whole trunk line situation in Grand Bend. Yes, I absolutely did agree with let's go forward with Phase 1 of the trunk line, because we all did know Tridon was coming down the road and that likely they would be needing some services. We also were fully aware that Lambton Shores, because of their bridge work, was going to be ripping up the highway. And if we were going to do this kind of a thing, let's do it when they've got the highway ripped up, because it would be less expensive to do it at that point in time. I just want to make it clear that I've never been against the extension. The part that I still have a struggle with is the oversizing component. And the reason I struggle with that is because I still don't see where we have a need for a 25% oversizing of the pipe. I am very well aware of how the lands are zoned right now. We don't have any committed customers that are prepared to pay upfront for sewage build right now. So a pipe might last 100 years, but we haven't had one yet that's lasted 100 years. And we do rip up roads and replace trunk pipes. So I'm just pointing that out because those are points that come to mind right away. I know that in our priority setting back last spring, we spoke quite a bit about living within our means. And we also spoke about finishing what we started. But living within our means, I question whether we have really done as good of a job at living within our means as we could have. I realize we've got some development coming in from some of the other areas that we have developed over the last 20 years, but it's taken 20 years, and that's a long time to wait for growth. Some of that is conversations we've had for developers. They would like to proceed, but it's not carved in stone either. So are we living within our means? I'm just questioning whether it's time to stop paying for some of these sewage pipes that we may never use, and do we have other priorities that we should be looking at? So that's really all I wanted to say right now, because I'd like to see things be equitable between users and developers. And I've just seen too much with the users paying for the future development. I would like to have a recorded vote.
Yeah, thank you. Councillor Dietrich, you had something?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I won't take as long as Councillor Bond either. My concern is the sewer users are subsidizing a developer from out of town. Kind of goes again my grain, but anyway, it's not saying I won't vote for it.
Thank you, Councillor Oak.
Thank you, Mayor. I just want to comment on that that Councillor Dietrich just mentioned. It's my interpretation that Trident is paying their fair share for their own pipe, and we're not subsidizing their pipe. The amount that we're paying is for the oversizing for future development. Can somebody clarify that for me? That because there's a lot of misunderstanding, and I just want to put it on record. If it's one way or another, that my understanding is Trident. We are not subsidizing Trident. They would run the pipe and do their own pipe. We're looking at putting the extra in for future while the ground's dug up, and instead of if something happens down the road that we have to dig it up and make a bigger pipe. So is that the understanding here?
Mr. Giberson, please.
Through you, Mayor Finch, I couldn't have said it better. That is exactly the situation. Trident in the back, the appendices of the draft agreement, there was a schedule of costs. The 1.8 million is the cost for the local sewer required for Trident. The increase, the 600,000, is to pay for our share of what we're asking the developer to do. So no, we are not subsidizing Trident, not a penny. The 1.8 mil is what he would be required to pay, and he's paying the full amount.
Thank you, Mr. Oak.
Thank you, Don. And just one other clarification. There had been talk about putting an agreement together based on flow or usage. This agreement versus that kind of agreement, which is a better agreement for South Huron?
Mr. Giberson.
Through you, Mayor Finch, the incremental pipe size or oversharing is the best agreement that we will ever get. It is a huge win for the municipality. I cannot express what an enormous benefit that is for the municipality. Very typically, these trunk sewers are cost shared on flow proportion. If it's done that way, Trident would be paying for the flow that they require for the Solhaven subdivision, phase 1 and 2, would be approximately 25% of the 2.4 mil. And the municipality would be on the hook for the 1.8 mil, the 75%. So you'd have complete role reversal on this if you did it by the traditional way, the way that it's usually done by most other municipalities. We have the best deal you could possibly ever negotiate with a developer.
Thank you, Mr. Iverson. Deputy, go ahead, please.
Thank you. I want to thank staff and the residents for all the emails. I mean, it's nice to hear from the residents. Very important for me to hear from them. Decisions are made and from information. And I guess go back a little ways. I was involved in the sewage treatment plant when it was built. There's capacity there that we can oversize it if necessary. The PS2 station, pumping station, was rebuilt. The trunk sewer installation was put in there for this purpose. And here we are now. We have a big development coming here. And to me, to oversize this pipe is probably one of the cheapest things that we'll ever get. So I don't like going back and redigging and putting a pipe beside down the road. So I will be voting in favor of moving ahead with this. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Dietrich.
I'd just like to clarify. I thought we were talking about the extension. I realize that Trident's paying 1.8 million toward his project, but there's still this 600,000 that the sewer payers or the ratepayers, not the ratepayers, but sewer users are going to be kind of donating over the years. Just wanted to make sure that Councillor Oak knew that. I was just talking about the addition. Thank you.
We turn to Mr. Giverson for a response.
Yeah, through you, Mayor Finch. That's a very common comment that we're getting, that the development is not paying for development, that the sewer users are paying that cost. The sewer users are carrying the cost. They're only carrying this cost until it's repaid. The sewer users will get repaid from future development. Like all these other projects and anything that's in the DC charges bylaw, the funds have to come from somewhere in order to initially do it. So it's not that they're paying these costs and they'll never get their money back. They are carrying the costs until such time as that can be repaid to them. So there's no free ride and there's no free lunch for anybody. And including the developers. Developers are paying for development. It's either get it now or we get it later when things proceed. But nobody's getting a free ride, and the existing sewer users are just carrying that burden until such time as it's repaid to them. As we've indicated for London Road South, half the money's come back already, and the debenture gets paid off next year. And then it's all gravy after that. As we get more development comes in, that money keeps coming in until the full amount's repaid. So it's only like borrowing or lending the money, which will eventually be repaid. And as long as those bylaws stay on the books, and they stay forever. One thing that Andrew didn't mention is one of the benefits of a bylaw. The bylaws don't die unless council rescinds or removes a bylaw. So we'll recover those costs until the full amount is repaid.
Councillor Oak.
Yeah, just a question on the cost. If we go with a cost recovery bylaw, if we were going to go that route, if this passes, is there a way that we can add interest to that as well? And because there are some agreements where there is interest and some there isn't. So I wanted to clarify that as part of carrying it, I think the interest should be included as well, just to make sure that the users are getting benefit of carrying this as well.
Mr. Giverson.
Through you, Mayor Finch. Absolutely. Could not agree more. We have one bylaw, cost recovery bylaw. It's a 2003 that did not include the interest. All the other bylaws since that time have the full interest in the cost recovery amount. And that's, if council chose to go the capital cost recovery route, I got to keep our treasurer happy here, so it definitely would include interest. So the users who are carrying that cost are also the recovery would be for interest on that money.
Mr. Oak.
So just to follow up then, is there a way to get the interest if we were to go with the development charges?
Mr. Giverson, comment?
I'm not sure if Andrew is still on. It's more of a question.
Andrew,
for Andrew.
would you know?
Yes, you can include interest in development charges.
Okay, thank you. Any other comments from members of council? Very well. Deputy, if you could take the chair, please. I'm going to make a comment. Moment, my computer just logged off for a second. And thank you for your indulgence. Original development discussions first started just over 100 years ago as to whether or not Oakwood Park should be allowed, which started off as a single cottage to what it is today. And then Grand Cove, probably 50 or so years ago, which is built on former farmland. In reviewing the correspondence from the Grand Bend area residents, there appears to be some misinformation on the funding formula, and therefore it's important to set the record straight. South Huron Council has no intention of forcing any current community who are on septic to hook into the new line. Why would be? There's no reason to. It should also be noted that there's no increases in taxes because, no increase in taxes. This is not a project paid for by taxes. This is a user fee system that allows us to leverage funds in current reserves for the sustainability of current and future users, which is what the plan was about when the sewage treatment plant was built years ago. Plus all the investment is mentioned of the increased sizing of the sewer lines to date. Many will have an opinion, and that is okay. Excuse me. The computer's acting up slightly here. Many will have an opinion that is okay, but we are the decision makers, and decisions must be based on facts from evidence-based reports and what will be in the best interest for the municipality over decades in the future. We should be proud to know that developers look at our area as a place they want to invest, unlike other municipalities, simply because they do not have the advanced infrastructure like we do. But that is because there was vision to get us here today, and that should not be overlooked as articulated here tonight. This is not about Tridon getting something for nothing. If anything, it is about us taking advantage of the opportunity that became available to us because of the Tridon development. And regarding the argument, development pays for development, this is exactly what this will do. In fact, it's been very clear that Tridon pays their costs completely, but we will be holding the key for the next developers. We've done this in the past before and is in the package tonight and worked well. The sewage treatment plant was built knowing full well that future development was inevitable. It all started with that single cottage changing the official plan at that time and resulting in the growth we now embrace. The 25% shared cost is a wise and visionary recommendation that has been extremely well discussed, very well researched, and articulated in the most professional way by our very credible Director of Operations, Mr. Giverson. Supporting information came from his team, lawyers, engineers, and other experts. This was not done haphazardly at all. The trunk sewer project is consistent with long-term planning to benefit the entire area. By not proceeding with this project, it would be, in fact, seal the fate of current users and future generations. It would mean that the rates for current users, such as those in Grand Cove, will increase dramatically over time because they are the few on the system that it can accommodate probably 2,000 South Huron users rather than 500 or so on it now. For me, it is very clear how important this project is as it dovetails into the current investments of the millions invested to now. It is imperative for that region of South Huron to continue on this investment because it makes common sense to do so. Rome was not built in a day, and to say no to this, then the reality is that you will be saying no to future housing during a housing crisis. You will be saying no to economic development, but you would be agreeing with a form of NIMBYism that would only contribute to increased housing costs and missed economic opportunities for our municipality long after we are gone. I do receive complaints from Grand Cove about their sewer costs, and I remind you that Trident is not yet hooked up, but over time, once they are, it will have a positive impact on their bills. It is quite simple. The more people on it, the more stable the costs are. That's common sense also. The whole area is referred to as the Port Blake planning area. Hence, this area has been targeted for development of some kind for decades. We are well positioned and need to ensure the continued growth and prosperity of future generations. And I'm not talking about the next 5 years. I'm referring to the next 5 years to 100 years of growth. That is what long-term planning is about. If Trident had not been approved, then there would be no need to expand the trunk line. But the reality is that it has, and therefore requires council to take advantage of this new opportunity and consider what is next for the area, hence future official plans. This investment is a wise investment for South Huron. There will be those that say it is a risk. And what I will say to that is, so is getting up in the morning, or buying a house, or buying a car, or having a child, or starting a business. But we do it anyways. This is a well-researched, calculated risk that will position South Huron as a community for development opportunities for 100 years and beyond. And respectfully, this is all about common sense. And in closing, leadership is not about the next election. Leadership is about the next generation of people. Thank you very much. And thank you very much, Deputy. Any other comments on this before we move on? No further discussion. We have a mover and a seconder. Madam Clerk.
So I'll just reread the recommendation on the table. So that South Huron Committee of the Whole recommends to council to approve the draft cost sharing agreement in principle. And that South Huron Committee of the Whole recommends to council that the mayor and clerk be authorized to sign a cost sharing agreement with Trident Group LTD and Trident Properties LTD for the extension of the Grand Bend Trunk Sewer, subject to an approval of an associated budget. That was moved by Member Neeb and seconded by Member Dietrich. And Member Vaughn called for a recorded vote. Member Oak? Member Neeb?
Yes.
Member Vaughn?
No.
Member Finch?
Yes.
Member Dietrich?
Yes.
And Member Dietrich.
Yes.
That carries 5-1. So the next recommendation that would be on the table is that South Huron Committee of the Whole recommends to council to recover the oversizing costs through a future cost recovery bylaw or recover the growth related costs by including this project in a future DC charges background study and future development charges bylaw.
Thank you. We're doing a recorded vote on this also.
Yes, okay. So the mover for that, again, as it was a split, would be Member Neeb and seconded by Member Dietrich. So for a recorded vote on this one.
I'll ask, are there any questions at this point? Any other questions on that? Councillor Oak?
Yeah, I guess just when does this have to be decided, which direction we go on the cost recovery or a DC I guess just wanting to make sure everybody's aware of the process and timelines.
Mr. Giverson, please.
Yes, through you, Mayor Finch. The decision on whether to include this in the DC charges bylaw has to be made within 2024 as part of the DC charges background study. So at the end of that study, then there would be a recommendation to include it in the DC charges bylaw that expires in March 2025.
Very well. Go ahead, Mr. Oak.
And if the project goes ahead this year, or in 2024, and we decide later in 2024 to go with the development charges route, how is the 600,000 being carried?
Mr. Giverson or?
Through you, Mayor Finch, it would be proposed to be carried the same way as it's proposed now, that it would be funded from the sewer reserves. And at such time as council chooses a cost recovery bylaw or DC charges bylaw, that would be the mechanism to repay.
Thank you. If there's no further questions, we have a mover and a seconder, request for a recorded vote. Turn it over to Madam Clerk.
Member Dietrich, so the motion on the floor that South Huron Committee of the Whole recommends to council to recover the oversizing costs through a future cost recovery bylaw or recover the growth related costs by including this project in a future DC charges background study and future development charges bylaw. It's a recorded vote.
Yes.
Member Oak,
Yes.
Member Finch,
Yes.
Member Vaughn,
Yes.
Member Neeb,
Yes.
and Member Dietrich.
Yes.
Your microphone's on.
Sorry, yes.
That carries 6-0.
Thank you. Very well. Moving along, Ms. Masula Collison, please.
The South Huron Committee of the Whole receives the staff presentation regarding the proposed Grand Bend Trunk Sewer Extension, resolution number 428, 2023, for information.
And a mover, please. Councillor Oak, seconded by Councillor Neeb. Any discussion? Call the question. All in favor? That carries with 6. Thank you. And number 5, please.
The South Huron Committee of the Whole does now adjourn at 6:11 PM.
Moved by Deputy Mayor, seconded by Councillor Neeb. No discussion. Call the question. All in favor? That carries with 6. Thank you. And thank you everyone for attending.